So, I just finished watching all 10 episodes of Bleach 1000 Year Blood War Part 3 that are currently out, and man, I was genuinely not prepared for these episodes even as a manga reader because of all the added content and supervision from Taite Kubo himself. This part was hyped up to have the most changes and additional content that wasn't in the manga, and I'm glad to see them keeping their promise. We have some really nice additions that add a lot to the characters and give them some much needed screen time, along with changes that tie up some loose ends from the original manga. The production quality has also massively improved after the disappointing second part, where they literally had to release an unfinished final episode. So far, part 3 has been a massive improvement on all fronts for the series, and let's talk about it. One of the biggest changes made in the previous part was Kubo saving Squad Zero's reputation. In case you didn't know, Squad Zero were the literal definition of frauds in the manga. They were hyped up for an insanely long time, only to get no-diffed by the Holy Knights. It was one of the most hated parts about this arc, and Kubo thankfully tried his best to salvage their reputation in the anime. And big emphasis on tried, because on God they're still fraudulent as hell. Instead of having the Quincy's kill Squad Zero members, Kubo makes them off themselves in order to break the seal on Shutara's Bankai. It was honestly really cool to see a completely anime original Bankai at the end of part 2, but the disappointment was even greater when it turned out to be completely useless just a few minutes into the first episode of part 3. It was definitely the most disappointing added content for me, but thankfully it's only uphill from here. Starting with all the Uryu glazing. It genuinely feels like Kubo randomly woke up one day and decided to make him a menace for part 3. Like he did not have this much gas in the manga at all. He single-handedly took down Senjumaru, who's supposed to be one of the strongest Soul Reapers, especially with her Bankai unleashed, then left a gaping hole in Ichigo and proceeded to do the same with Renji. I remember people used to complain about the lack of Uryu screen time in this arc despite it focusing on the Quincy's, so it seems like Kubo heard all that and said bet. In all seriousness though, I really love and appreciate the addition of Renji vs Uryu in this part. They have a lot of history together, with Uryu failing to save Rukia from him in Karakura town, and then both of them becoming Ichigo's rivals, Renji as his Soul Reaper rival and Uryu as his Quincy one. It was also a really nice way to properly showcase Renji's true Bankai, because he barely used it in the previous part. It is also the best animated fight in this part so far and my personal favorite. The animators went all out showcasing just how much stronger Renji has gotten after his training with Squad Zero and unlocking his true Bankai. There were some amazing cuts of animation in this fight that reignited my hope for the animation of this arc after the disappointing second part. Next up, let's talk about my favorite episode so far. And of course, it's none other than the Mayuri and Nemu one. I was originally planning to wait for this season to end before making a video on Bleach, but watching this episode made me reconsider. It's easily up there with the Rukia Bankai as one of my favorite Bleach episodes of all time. Mayuri has always been one of the most interesting characters in the series due to his morality and the lines he's willing to cross for the sake of science. The man genuinely looks and acts like an antagonist for most of the series, but this episode finally dives deeper into his character and relationship with Nemu. Does he actually care about her as a person, or does he only see her as a test subject? And the episode does an incredible job at showcasing both sides to make things kind of ambiguous. Giving Mayuri a redemption arc this late into the series would honestly feel very cheap if it's done incorrectly. After all the insane things he's done and straight up abusing Nemu, I genuinely would have hated a "he's always cared about her" sob story right before her death. Instead, Kubo makes him cut out the sentimental music, switch back to his scientist persona, after being reminded of the path he chose by Sailaporo. The scene makes you consider all the previous moments of him seemingly caring about her in the episode, and that's the beautiful part, because the last scene of the episode then shows that maybe he does actually care about her. Kubo intentionally left everything ambiguous enough to not feel like a cheap sob story, and it's absolutely perfect because it doesn't take away from Mayuri's character in the slightest. My personal interpretation is that Mayuri definitely cares about Nemu, but he intentionally chooses to suppress that human part of himself for the sake of science and to not have regrets over the things he's done. Nemu's final attack was definitely a standout moment from the episode, and the animation was incredible. There wasn't much to the fight itself, but I'm glad they did justice to Nemu's final moments, and the music playing was just absolutely perfect as well. Finally, let's talk about the production quality of this part. To be blunt, it's a massive improvement over the second core, and I'm really happy to see that. The schedule for the previous part got so bad that they had to add an unfinished final episode which had 7 minutes of recap filler. Some people were speculating it was intentional to end it on a cliffhanger, but I remember hearing some news that it was because of production issues. I can't recall the source, but it would make sense considering part 2 had very few standout moments of animation compared to part 1 and now 3. Plus, the first episode of part 3 had a pretty long recap of the final episode, which makes me think that they wanted to air both episodes together, but ultimately were unable to. The animation on every single fight during part 3 has been amazing, partly because they actually have an action animation director this time around, a role which was entirely absent in the second part if I recall correctly. So yeah, this season has been surprisingly great so far, and I'm really excited for the last 2 episodes. Though I do want them to take a longer break before returning with part 4. I really want the staff members to have enough time to properly cook some great moments for the conclusion of this arc. With all that being said though, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave a comment about your thoughts on part 3, and consider subscribing to the channel for more anime and manga content.